When the United States labels a group a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, it's not just rhetoric. It's a legal move with sweeping consequences. The designation triggers immediate financial and legal penalties, isolating the group from the global system. Multiple U.S. agencies, including the State and Treasury Departments, are involved in this process. Once on the FTO list, it's illegal for any U.S. person or entity to provide material support, money, weapons, training, or even advice. The aim: cut off the group's resources and cripple its operations worldwide. The label also has immigration consequences. Members and supporters are barred from entering the U.S., and those already here can be deported. This sends a message. The U.S. won't tolerate anyone linked to these groups, extending its reach far beyond its borders. The FTO label paints a target on the group, not just from the U.S. but from global financial institutions wary of sanctions. Banks worldwide avoid any transactions that could be linked to the group, fearing massive fines or exclusion from the U.S. financial system. The result is global isolation, making it nearly impossible for the group to function in today's interconnected world. For any organization, this is a devastating blow. The Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, isn't a typical cartel with a single boss. It's a shadowy network of high-ranking Venezuelan officials, especially within the military. The name comes from the sun insignias worn by National Guard generals, hinting that those meant to uphold the law are allegedly running the show. U.S. officials allege this network controls key drug routes, moving cocaine from Colombia through Venezuela to global markets. Their power lets them move shipments unchecked, turning Venezuela into a safe corridor for narcotics. The cartel is decentralized. Various factions within the government and military compete and cooperate, making it resilient and hard to dismantle. Taking out one leader doesn't stop the operation. New players step in. The Trump administration's terrorist designation marks a major escalation, framing the cartel's activities as not just criminal, but as terrorist violence threatening the hemisphere. This shift carries heavy political and military implications. The U.S. State Department's announcement was blunt. The Cartel of the Suns is a state-sponsored terrorist group, allegedly run by Venezuela's top leadership. The most explosive claim? President Nicolas Maduro himself is accused of leading this narco-terrorist network. Yet, the U.S. has released no public evidence, no documents, no intercepts, no witness testimony to back up these charges. This secrecy fuels skepticism. Is this a national security necessity, or a political move to delegitimize Maduro? Intelligence agencies often keep sources secret, but the lack of proof leaves the world to take the U.S. at its word. By linking the cartel to terrorism, the U.S. elevates the issue from law enforcement to national security, justifying a more robust response. The focus is clear. The U.S. holds Maduro and his government directly responsible for drug flows and regional instability. This narrative fits into a broader campaign against crime, drugs, and illegal immigration from Latin America. The terrorist label isn't just about Venezuela. It's about reshaping U.S. policy in the region. The stakes are high, and the world is watching for the next move. The lack of transparency, however, leaves many questions unanswered. Labeling the Cartel of the Suns as an FTO isn't just symbolic, it unlocks powerful new legal tools for the U.S. government. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the FTO label expands options for the president, justifying actions that might have been off-limits before. Now, any support for the cartel, financial, logistical, or otherwise, is a federal crime for Americans and U.S. companies. The broad definition of material support creates a chilling effect on business with Venezuela. The FTO status could also legally authorize military strikes or covert operations, reframing them as counterterrorism rather than acts of war. President Trump has already signaled a confrontational stance, and the FTO label provides legal cover to intensify pressure. The conflict is no longer just political, it's now a fight against a designated terrorist entity. This dramatically raises the stakes and makes U.S. intervention more plausible than ever. Alongside the terrorist designation, the U.S. has ramped up its military presence in the Caribbean, sending a clear message. The USS Gerald R. Ford, a top-tier aircraft carrier, and its strike group are now conducting exercises near Venezuela under Operation Southern Spear. This show of force includes fighter jets, support ships, and thousands of personnel. an unmistakable projection of power. Days before the FTO announcement, the U.S. staged a large-scale bomber demo, featuring F/A-18s and a B-52 bomber. These aren't routine drills, they're calculated displays meant to intimidate Venezuela's leadership. Since September, U.S. forces have carried out at least 20 deadly maritime strikes in the region, killing dozens on boats accused of drug smuggling, without public evidence. These actions set a precedent for using deadly force and raise questions about legality and rules of engagement. The military hardware is in place, the legal justification established, and U.S. forces are on high alert. While officials say no decisions are final, the readiness for conflict is clear. For Venezuela, the threat feels more real than ever. The region is on edge, watching for the next move. The risk of escalation is undeniable. The FTO label is another blow to Venezuela's collapsing economy. Existing U.S. sanctions have already crippled the vital oil industry, forcing Venezuela to sell crude at a loss on the black market. The new designation tightens the vice. Banks, shippers, and insurers will avoid any dealings with Venezuela, fearing U.S. penalties. This will further cut oil exports and imports of essential goods, worsening the humanitarian crisis. Chevron's limited license to operate in Venezuela remains, but the FTO label gives the U.S. a legal pretext to revoke it or seize oil shipments. For ordinary Venezuelans, this means even less food, medicine, and basic services. While sanctions target the government, it's the people who suffer most. Economists warn poverty and hardship will only deepen. Facing U.S. pressure and military threats, President Maduro's government has responded with defiance. Maduro and his officials dismiss U.S. actions as baseless aggression, staging military parades to project strength and rally nationalist sentiment. Maduro's public bravado, "It's Friday, and I'm going to party," is a calculated move to show he's unshaken. Behind the scenes, Maduro has signaled openness to dialogue, offering to meet President Trump face-to-face. Trump has hinted at talks, but so far, no progress has been made. Deep mistrust remains. The U.S. doubts Maduro's sincerity, while Venezuela sees U.S. moves as a prelude to regime change. Most analysts say real negotiations are unlikely unless Maduro's military support fractures. Until then, both sides remain locked in a dangerous standoff. The FTO label and U.S. military buildup have fueled fears of imminent conflict. But most experts say a full-scale invasion is unlikely, too costly, too risky, and diplomatically isolating. If the U.S. acts, it would likely be limited airstrikes on cartel-linked sites, aiming to disrupt operations without triggering all-out war. Even targeted strikes carry huge risks. Violating Venezuelan sovereignty could rally support for Maduro and spark unpredictable escalation. The strategy seems designed to push Venezuela to the brink, hoping internal support for Maduro collapses. But this high-stakes gamble could backfire, leading to violence and regional instability. The world is watching, hoping for restraint. The next move could shape the region's future. Venezuela stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain. The U.S. pressure campaign could force a transition if the military abandons Maduro, opening the door to new elections and recovery. But if Maduro holds on and the U.S. escalates, the country could spiral into conflict, or even civil war, deepening the humanitarian crisis. A third scenario: a prolonged stalemate, with sanctions tightening and suffering increasing, but no political breakthrough. Each path carries enormous risks for Venezuela's 30 million people. The stakes are high, and the outcome depends on decisions made in Washington and Caracas. For now, Venezuela remains trapped in crisis, with no clear end in sight. The world waits to see what comes next.